They were warm when they needed you, different when they didn't. Someone who is warm when they need you, who reaches out when things are hard for them, who makes you feel important, valued, necessary, as long as you are giving them something they need. And then, in the moments when you need something shifts. Not dramatically, just enough to leave you feeling slightly alone in a room you thought you shared. This is about that relationship, and how long it can take to understand what you were actually in. We tend to think of love as something consistent, something that is present not just when it is convenient, but when it isn't. Not just when you are giving, but when you are receiving. Not just when things are easy, but when they are hard. But some people have never learned to love that way. Not because they are cruel, not because they set out to take from you, but because somewhere in their history, they learned a version of connection that was transactional, where closeness was something you moved toward when you needed something, and away from when the need was met. And they brought that version into every relationship they ever had, including yours. From the outside, the relationship looked real. They showed up. They called. They told you things, sometimes very personal things, in moments when they needed to be heard. And in those moments, you felt chosen. You felt trusted. You felt like the person they turned to when things mattered. And that felt like love, because in many ways it resembled love. It had the textures of love, intimacy, vulnerability, the sense of being needed by someone who mattered to you. Pause. What it was missing was the reciprocity, the movement toward you when you were the one who needed, the warmth that stayed constant rather than arriving, only when they had something to bring or something to take. But that absence was subtle enough that you explained it. They're just not good at this. They show love differently. I don't need much anyway. There was probably a moment when you needed something. Not dramatically, not excessively, just the ordinary need of a person going through something difficult. And the person you had always shown up for was not quite there, not absent, just elsewhere in a way that was hard to name. Distracted, minimizing, redirecting the conversation back to themselves before you had finished. And you noticed, not with anger at first, with confusion, because you had been so present for them, and you had assumed, without quite realizing you were assuming, that presence was mutual, that the relationship worked in both directions. But in that moment, you felt it clearly. The warmth had a condition, and the condition was that you were the one providing something. There are reasons it took as long as it did. The first is that you are someone who gives, genuinely, naturally, without keeping score. And people who give without keeping score often don't notice the imbalance, because they are not watching for it. They are too busy being present, too focused on what the other person needs, to track what they themselves are not receiving. The second reason is that the relationship did have real moments, real warmth, real connection, real times when they were present in ways that felt genuine, and those moments became the evidence you held on to, the proof that what you had was real, even as the pattern told a different story. And the third reason is the hardest to say. You needed it to be real. You had invested in this relationship. You had given it years, or energy, or the particular kind of hope that forms when you care about someone and believe they care back. And the cost of seeing clearly was the cost of revising everything you had believed about what you shared. The cost of this kind of relationship is not always obvious. It shows up in the way you slowly adjusted your needs downward. Stopped expecting presence. Stopped expecting reciprocity. Stopped expecting to be shown up for. Because experience had taught you that expecting those things from this person led only to disappointment. It shows up in the way you started to question yourself. Maybe I'm asking too much. Maybe this is how relationships work. Maybe I'm the one who gives and that's just my role. And it shows up in the exhaustion of a relationship that only ever moved in one direction, where you were always the one arriving, the one initiating, the one making sure things stayed intact, while they arrived when it suited them and retreated when it didn't. And perhaps most painfully, in the way you kept giving, long after the pattern was clear, because stopping felt like proof that you were the problem. I want to say something important. This is not about villains. The person in this relationship was not necessarily calculating. They were not sitting somewhere deciding to use you. Most people who love conditionally do not know they are doing it. They have simply never learned another way. They learned somewhere early that connection was something you moved toward when you needed, and that relationships were places you went to be supported, without developing the equal capacity to offer support when they were not in need themselves. That is a limitation, a real one, but it is not malice. And understanding that does not mean you have to stay. It does not mean the relationship was acceptable. It just means that what happened to you was not about your worth. It was about their capacity, and those are not the same thing. If you have been in a relationship where the love felt conditional, where the warmth arrived when you were giving and faded when you were not, I want you to hear this. The fact that they could not love you fully was never evidence that you were not worth loving fully. You were worth it. You still are, but worth is not the same as capacity. And sometimes the people we love most deeply simply do not have the capacity to love us back in the way we need. That is one of the quieter griefs no one talks about. Not the grief of being hated, but the grief of being loved, just not enough. Just not in the right direction. Just not when you needed it most. That grief is real, and it deserves to be named.